I've seen a lot of Pink Floyd documentaries, and they all essentially say the same thing. After Sid left, the band was directionless until they hit on Meddle, which paved the way for Dark Side of the Moon. Personally, I think they were already showing glimmers of this on their previous records, but Meddle is definitely what I and many Pink Floyd fans would call their classic period. And it partially all comes down to one majestic piece. Echoes. Echoes, echoes, echoes. I love this piece so much. It is legitimately one of my favorite pieces of music ever. I played it recently at Cafe Wah for a very enthusiastic crowd, and my own piece, Elements, is essentially a love letter to the song. And even echoes aside, the rest of the album is pretty solid as well. Right away, the cover is very intriguing, but Storm Thurgeson said this was his least favorite Floyd album cover, being the inside of an ear with water ripples superimposed over it. You can see it better if you turn it on its side. But I think it really works with Echoes for obvious reasons. By this point, they had certainly logged a lot of hours together as a band. They had been touring constantly, refining their sound and working out ideas. Nick Mason admits this felt like the first time Pink Floyd was really gelling together in the studio as a real band, and I concur, they sound really tight this time around. Of course, sonic experimentation was still their friend, experimenting with new recording techniques and effects. Apparently they had planned an entire album using household objects for instruments. But thankfully they abandoned this idea and began constructing pieces together called Nothings, which turned into The Son of Nothings, and finally Return of the Son of Nothings, which would eventually become the basis for Echoes.
Everyone would be throwing things in and seeing what worked and what didn't.
But these nothings would provide other ideas as well, one of which would inspire Meddle's opening instrumental, One of These Days, their best opening track since Astronomy Domine. It opens ominously again, which is going to be a running theme in these videos for a while. This time with wind sounds provided by a synthesizer, leading into a thumping bass affected with echo. David Gilmour had been experimenting with the sound on guitar until Roger Waters came up with the idea to play it on bass. There's actually two basses being played on the song. The first one with the echo effect is played by Dave. The second one with duller strings is played by Roger. Supposedly they sent a roadie out to get fresh strings and he went to sleep with his girlfriend instead. By the way, if you want to watch an extremely entertaining video on these bass parts, check out Guy Pratt's Lockdown Licks.
I'll show you how it starts. It starts like this. It literally tells you what the tempo is. And then off you go.
As the piece moves on, violent organ and cymbals strike at the beginning of each phrase. Heavy drum hits add to the tension, along with Dave's machine-like slide guitar. Then the piece breaks down to a bass filtered through a rhythmic tremolo.
That's the Doctor Who bit.
It really does create this feeling of paranoia before an evil voice, provided by Nick Mason at a slowed down pitch, says, and then we're off on a heavy shuffle featuring Dave's slide guitar. This song would be long retained in their live sets, even on Roger and Dave's solo tours. It's a killer way to open this album, and when it dies back down to the wind sounds, you're thinking, well, how are they going to follow that? With a soft acoustic number called A Pillow of Winds, named after a hand in Mahjong, and nicely tying in with the wind theme. This Beatles-esque love ballad, featuring Dave's soft voice, is exactly what you want to hear after a heavy blues number. It kind of reminds me of how Dear Prudence follows Back in the USSR on the Beatles' White Album. I wouldn't say A Pillow of Winds is as good a song as Dear Prudence, but it does give the album some dynamics and enhances the listening experience of the entire album as one cohesive body of work. This and the following number, Fearless, were a collaboration between Dave and Roger. The latter has more of a country rock flavor, very Neil Young-like, with a memorable guitar riff written by Roger in open G tuning. These are my favorite lyrics on side 1. Fearlessly, the idiot faced the crowd, smiling. I feel like this might be an allusion to Sid, but it's more tied in with Liverpool soccer fans. They sample a soccer crowd chanting Rodgers and Hammerstein's You'll Never Walk Alone. I've never really been quite sure what to think of it. I'm not really a big soccer guy. I'm assuming the cheering crowd is meant to support the protagonist. If I had to nitpick, I'd say Dave's voice feels a bit soft on this one. Not bad, just doesn't really bring the same dynamics he usually does. I actually really like the version Nick Mason's Saucerful of Secrets does with Gary Kemp singing. Now, Roger Waters does get a chance to sing on a jazzy swing he wrote himself called Saint Tropez, written about a trip in France. This is the first song in Pink Floyd's catalog that I feel does justice to Roger's quirky voice. It gives the song a quintessentially English feel and is augmented by a horn-like guitar solo by Dave, kind of similar to what Brian May would do in Queen, and a soft jazz piano solo by Rick, another nice mellow tune. The closing number of side 1 is something of a novelty song called Seamus, a blues number featuring Steve Marriott's dog howling. It's definitely the weakest song on the album, but thankfully it doesn't go on too long and at least shows that Pink Floyd still has a sense of humor. If I was to just go off side 1 of this record, I'd say it's a nice mellow listen with a rocking opener. But we're really just getting started. Like Adam Hartmother, Echoes takes up an entire side of this record, clocking in at 23.5 minutes. And it really all evolved from one majestic sound. What sounds like the sonar of a submarine is actually a piano being fed through a Leslie speaker, normally paired with a B3 organ for that rotating horn effect.
I went, ooh, let's see what it's like. Ding, ding, ding. And everyone said, yeah! Yeah!
And that started feeding back.
And I thought, what's this note sound like here? And that's how it started.
It just gives you the feeling like you've stepped into a different world. That ethereal violin-sounding guitar is done by rubbing a brass slide against the high E string. I'm sure a lot of people will say it's even better on an acid trip if it hasn't already been written in the comments below. Actually, come to think of it, why didn't I ever listen to this piece while dropping acid? But Roger's lyrics are so vivid. Overhead, the albatross, labyrinths of coral caves, and most importantly, the more grounded reaction to the human condition. There's many different ways to interpret this piece, but I've always felt it paints this feeling of solitude in this grand echoing landscape, and the desire to alleviate that feeling through human contact.
It was the beginning of empathy, if you like. You know, two strangers passing in the street by chance, two passing glances meet, and I am you and what I see is me. There's a sort of thread that's gone through everything for me ever since.
The way Dave and Rick sing this in harmony really personifies the melancholic nature of the theme, and it's followed by that iconic descending guitar and bass line that Andrew Lloyd Webber ripped off for Phantom of the Opera. And just before you think maybe one section has gone on too long, they change things up. One of my favorite moments in any Pink Floyd song is when the majestic main theme just plows into that funk jam, featuring Rick's Hammond and Dave's fuzz guitar parts. It's similar to the jam heard on Adam Hartmother, but it sounds so much more lively, so tight, and Dave's delay-driven guitar carries on the theme of Echoes. Then it transitions into the more experimental section of the song, which is most people's least favorite part, but again, it ties in with the mood of isolation and possibly desolation, with Dave's guitar fed backwards through a wah pedal to create those whale sounds. And then with Rick's Farfisa organ creeping in, we're joined by an echoing guitar line and the return of that piano ping, which you can hear an early version of as one of the nothings they jammed on. It's like the sky has opened up, this feeling of hope before the vocals come back in. I think it was from rehearsing it recently that we just realized how brilliant it is that they just go right back to the main part. The transitions in the song are genius. And by the time you get to that soft ending with Dave and Rick trading licks, you reflect on this journey they've taken you on. This is it, man. This is where the peak of Pink Floyd really begins, where they finally start to feel comfortable in their own skin without the shell of Syd Barrett. Every band member contributes their strongest attribute to this epic masterpiece. And would you believe it's only going to get better live? The biggest tragedy with this record is that while it did sell well in the UK and Europe, it wasn't publicized well in America and didn't get the praise it deserved, leading to the band needing an overhaul with their parent record company for their next release. But that hasn't stopped fans and critics alike from considering this one of their best works, many even citing it as the first real Pink Floyd album. So finally, after 5 albums of inconsistency, I can finally award Meddle a well-deserved goldfish. Seriously, this old vinyl copy I have is scratchy as hell, and I still listen to it. In fact, when I was getting shots of the record on my turntable, I got so wrapped up in listening to echoes that I forgot to reposition my camera and just left it running.
Oh shit. Forgot all about that.
There's no doubt that the essential track is Echoes. It may very well be in my top 10 favorite rock songs of all time. But you really can't go wrong with the rest of the tracks. The opening One of These Days, the gentle pillow of winds, the country rock gem Fearless. And again, this really is an album that should be listened to all the way through without interruptions. I can safely say Meddle has eclipsed Piper at the Gates of Dawn, but don't worry, we won't forget about it. Oh man, does it feel so good to be at this point in time. And I think you all know what's coming up, but we got a couple of pit stops on the way, so I'll see you then.